the Franklin was an experience that you never forget. I mean, it's always right there, but it was quite an adventure, and I guess the worst of it was losing all your friends, you know, and resolving yourself to that and what had happened. That really turned my life that night, you know, to working with the Y. And so this was before the Battle of Okinawa, and they were still trying to stop the Japanese move and their ammunition and their plants and all the rest, you know. And so we had a task force. We had 2 cruisers and about 6 or 8 destroyers and of course all the other equipment, I mean ships, you know, to service it all. And we were under attack by the Japanese for several nights, so we really didn't go in our bunks very long, and we'd be awakened and have to go to general quarters. And that was a rude awakening because they had bells and they had sirens, and you know, it was a very loud commotion when they had general quarters sounded. I really didn't get very much sleep that night, and the last time I went to in my bunk, why I decided I was going to take my clothes off and in my skivvies and get into my bed and get some sleep. You know, I was tired of this getting up and running, so I actually took my shoes and socks off and everything.
As Franklin began launching her morning strike packages against Kobe Harbor, Captain Gerry secured from general quarters and placed the crew on a modified Condition 3, which allowed his exhausted crew a chance to eat a hot breakfast.
But it was a quick dinner, a quick breakfast. And so then we went up to communications to your watch. So that's where I was when the Franklin was hit by the bomber, by a Japanese bomb. And what I was doing, I was sitting in a chair putting my socks on. And these offices were not very big. It wasn't, I don't think it was half the width of this room. And had 2 portholes in it, but the portholes had been sealed in Honolulu so that no one would accidentally open one and show any light. So I was sitting in this chair putting my socks and shoes on when we were hit, and it was a tremendous blast.
It hit. You don't really, it was like, what the heck happened?
Table went up, the chairs went up, and everything fell flat on the deck.
And the explosion blew me right up against the overhead.
I was blown out of my bunk, and I started up the ladder toward the gun, which is shut above us, and fire coming down the ladder, so there was no way for me to go.
There was some pressure wave. Of course, it was a noise. The sound was the big thing.
I heard a banging sound, and I looked up. Something came through the overhead. I don't know what it was, but it blew up. Fell in front of me. By that time, it turned around. He got a belly full of shrapnel.
Yeah, you know, here they had this tremendous sealed steel deck, but he hit the forward elevator, and it broke the elevator, so the bomb went right down and into the hangar deck among all those planes, bombs, rockets, and everything.
One bomb struck the flight deck to port of the center line at frame 68, penetrated to the hangar, and detonated upon impact or just after ricocheting off the armored hangar deck. The second bomb was reported to have struck the flight deck in the vicinity of the after elevator and penetrated to the hangar, where it detonated in the way of parked planes.
It knocked me to the floor, and knocked us all around in there. And for the first few minutes, you know, it was, gosh, what's happened? You know, it was a tremendous explosion. And so I opened the compartment door, and the flame, this was just within a few seconds, a few minutes, and the flames were already shooting up from the hangar deck up the ladders, up the stairways you would call them, but the ladderways, and up onto the floor we were on. And on the flight deck, there must have been 40 planes ready to take off, and they were turned into the wind to take off. And so when it hit, I mean, it just tore that ship apart.
The explosions just kept going on and on and on, and we didn't know really what was happening up above at all. And we didn't know whether the ship was going to sink or what.
Bombs and rockets were going off in the hangar deck and on the flight deck. And of course the ammunition was popping, and the bombs were going off, and the rockets were firing. And at one point, when I was in the water, I could see the rockets going, you know, just shooting out the sides of the ship and through the flight deck.
The fire raged as bombs, rockets, and small caliber ammunition continued to explode with increasing violence.
So the only areas that were open were the housing, the bunks, the housing areas, you know, where sailors were. And lots of them were still in their bunks because they weren't on watch, you know, they were in their area. And it nearly destroyed the whole Marine detachment, fire and smoke and gas. And a great deal of it was asphyxiation. And the stories that are told, you know, of men trying to get through ventilators and all kinds of things to get out of those areas, and the fire the gasoline went down the ladders and into the compartments, you know, and it was just a massive destruction. And of course, we were on that deck below the hangar deck. Of course, the hangar deck's down here, and this is a deck sandwiched between the flight deck and the hangar deck. A lot of the pilot areas, their ready rooms were in that area between the hangar deck and the flight deck. And so they lost some of the pilots who were getting the last minute instructions. So they were killed too in there. And but there were a lot of pilots. All the planes on the flight deck were manned by pilots. And of course, when the bombs hit, why, it just made havoc. So I knew there was no chance of getting out by going out the door. And the CIC was next door, right across the hall, and I could see all these guys in there. And so I slammed the door shut. And when we were in Pearl Harbor, the portholes were open. And so I was leaning out, you know, and I dropped the pencil, and it fell down onto one of the gun mounts. And they had added 3 gun mounts alongside the island, 40 millimeter guns. And of course they had a catwalk in between them, you know. So I looked out there and I said, well, that would be a way to get out of here if I ever had to get out. So that's what I decided to do. I thought, well, we're going to have to open that porthole. And they were sealed with metal seals, with packing seals. And so I had to I reached out. I was mad. I thought, they should never have sealed them like that. And I grabbed the seal and ripped it off the porthole. Of course, it was a metal seal, and it cut me all the way to the bone on the 2 fingers that I had pulled in to pull it off. But I didn't notice. I mean, it didn't even affect me that I had done anything. When I took the porthole, opened the porthole, I thought we'd get a nice breeze. But instead, the smoke from the fires were down about, I'd say maybe that below the porthole. and you could see the line of fire, you know. But my only thought was here was an escape. We couldn't go out the door. We couldn't go out the compartment door because it would have been instant death out there. And in some of the material that was written later that I was able to read history of a number of the men on the Franklin, where they were and how they escaped and this sort of thing, officers who led them out to safety and below decks. And one of them had to do with the fact that all of the officers and men in CIC were killed, all of them. It must have been 20 or 30 of them in there, you know. So I started to go out the porthole, but I couldn't we put our life jackets on, but you couldn't go out, there wasn't enough space. So I dropped my life jacket and I told the guys in there, I said, we can go this way, you guys follow me, I'll show you. So I went out backwards and then dropped into that catwalk below, and which is about 20 feet, I guess, or so. I imagine I got on something and I could put my feet out, you know, and I dropped out after my life jacket. And at that point in time, there weren't very many people down below, many sailors on those gun mounts at all. But the sad thing about it is, I showed them how to get out, but out of the 6 or 7 guys that were up there in the communications office, none of them survived. They were all killed. After I'd hit the deck, I didn't pay any attention after that. Because if they didn't come out, there wasn't anything I could do. But there was a ladder coming down from the porthole in the code room next door. A ladder coming down to that catwalk, and of course I didn't know it, didn't realize it was there. But so the gun mounts had large nets on either side, safety nets that were buoyant and had floats on them, and so they were in big U-shaped containers, maybe 6-8 feet long. And so the first thing I thought about, well, we got to release them. And I thought when you release them, there would be a rope that you could climb down into them. You know, you don't really think too clearly at that point. And so each of on the gun mount I was on, each of those floats had a pin, like it went in and was hinged so it came down and locked into place. So I was trying to break those loose, and just because of the salt weather and salt water, they wouldn't break. So I picked up a live 40 millimeter shell, which was very foolish, and banged on them the best I could to loosen them. And I dropped both nets on either side into the water. But the minute they dropped, they were gone. But they helped somebody else somewhere along the line, because some of the pilots were blown off the ship in their planes, and others dropped into the sea, and there were a lot of sailors in different parts of the ship that knew they couldn't survive, and they went into the water. And they never sounded abandoned ship, ever. The captain was not going to sound abandoned ship. And you're going to say stay until the last man. But we had an admiral and an admiral's staff aboard, and all those extra Marine pilots and all of these others, you know. And so one of the cruisers came alongside on the side of the ship that we were on, and pulled off the admiral's crew. They got off right away. But they left the captain and the ship's crew on the ship. And they were up in the island. And so they had a perfect view of all this explosions. And
all hell broke loose. There was a fire station there, fire hose, and a gear with a wheel on it. I turned the gear and I threw the hose out the porthole. Nada, zip, no water. I realized then, I think, that the water mains on the ship, or whatever they call them, had broken.
We took off running aft. We got back 3 or 4 compartments toward the stern, and there was a rocket had come down from the flight deck down through the hangar deck and exploded between the third and fourth deck. When we got near that, it was burning a fire there. So we turned around and ran back to the compartment where we were having breakfast. And we started to go forward. They said, no, there's fire forward. We can't go there.
I was running along, and this fellow was with me, and he said, I'm not staying down here, I'm going topside. And he ran right up the ladder, and there was a flash, and he just disappeared. He was there, and he was gone. And I was running forward in this passageway, and the guy was running right behind me, and there was another explosion. And I looked back, and there was a hole in the deck where he was. You know, it's that fast.
To escape, to get away, to leave the ship. We thought, of course, that it was going to go down with that tremendous explosions and what had happened.
The conflagration station was wrecked by the first blast and its personnel knocked out. So the firefighting had to be taken up by emergency parties. Water pressure was good for a while, but fires on the hangar deck soon severed the lines. Smoke and burning gas fumes were responsible for a great many casualties.
There were quite a few of us on that gun mount by, within a short period of time, because more of them were coming down, but there wasn't any place to go, and the gun mounts were ammunition storage underneath them, 40 millimeter gun storage, that fed the 40 millimeter. So there was a chance that the whole gun mount would explode, So it was chancy no matter how you looked at it, but for me it was better to be there than up in that compartment. And of course I didn't know they were all going to be killed up there either. Anyway, there was called a monkey rope, and it was attached up on some of the upper decks of the island structure. And so they were dropping those down, and some of the crew and some of the junior officers were coming down. And it was a rope with a knot every so far down the rope. So you could go down and hang on at that knot and drop to the next one. And so when it came down past me and this officer came down and vanished into the ocean, I thought, heck, I'm not going to stay here. But looking down the side of the ship, it was just as if somebody had taken a can opener and just wrenched open the whole side of the ship, and it was just a blaze of fire and explosions, all along the ship. No, I said the officer went down into the water, and so, no, it was my way of escaping. I had a life jacket on, and so when the rope came down, the next one came down, I grabbed it and went down. But it was winter in Japan, and there were heavy seas, and the waves were at least 70 feet deep into the bottom of the wave until the top. And so these guys were all lined up above me, kicking me, the one right above, to drop. Well, I looked down there and I saw that it was 70 feet into the bottom of the wave, and I said, I'm going to wait till the wave comes up. So I waited and dropped into the water when it was only maybe 30 feet or so into the water. And of course the ship was traveling at 30 knots, which is very fast. And so it pushed you away from the rear of the stern of the ship and the propellers. And so I was sitting out there watching this tremendous explosions off the ship, and flames going up 50, 60, 70, 100 feet in the air, and smoke. And so there I was, one of hundreds, I guess, that ran into the ocean. Well, I imagine maybe 5 or 6 hours. I lost track of time, and my waterproof watch was not waterproof, and so I lost track of time. So you're in your life, and all by yourself. And of course, because the ship is traveling so fast, it's pushing you away, so it wasn't long before you couldn't see anything. You can't really see much in those swells, One of the interesting things was that I had put my shoes and socks on when I was in that compartment, And when we got into the water, why, I had my glasses on and they were covered with soot and smoke. So I took them off and reached in under the water and got my glasses case out, put my glasses in it and put it under the water again. And I just started howling. It just struck me so funny. And of course it's because of the release too of all we'd been through. I couldn't clean them, so I put them back in my case in my pocket. And so all of a sudden my shoes slipped off and were gone, and then my socks slipped off and were gone, and that was kind of funny. So, and one thing that I really regretted was this guy came near me, a young fellow, and he wanted help. He says, I've broken my leg, and I don't know, I think maybe it was a pilot, I'm not sure. And I tried to swim over to him, but the currents were just too rough. And I just couldn't reach him. And I said, there'll be more in the water in a few minutes. You'll meet up with some more, and they'll help you. And I just couldn't help him. And eventually there were about 10 of us that got together. Yeah, I have no idea, but I imagine must have been about 5 or 6 hours. Of course, as I say, it was winter in Japan, and there's plenty of sharks around. I didn't even think about the sharks. I was more interested in surviving, and so about 10 of us got together, and just before we were picked up, I suggested we all say the Lord's Prayer together and thank God that we were being rescued, We saw this destroyer coming up off the horizon at the top of the swell, and so we were blowing our whistles and yelling and screaming and hollering, and just before it got to us, it veered off in another direction. So we had another 30, 40 minutes or an hour in the water before another destroyer came alongside. And they had thrown these cargo nets over and lashed their guys to the nets, and they'd reach in the water and pull you out, And I reached up there to pull myself up, and I was just like a rag doll. I had no strength whatsoever. And once I got aboard the ship, I passed out, was out for, I guess, for 24 hours. And they took all our clothes off and put them through the washers and dryers on the destroyer. So we had clean clothes when we came to. But that wound on my hand had bled so badly that they thought I was really seriously injured. So they put me in the mess hall, which was made into an infirmary. And so they gave me sulfur drugs and all kinds of stuff to stop the bleeding and everything. Oh yeah, you were taking a chance that you were going to miss the catwalk and end up in the ocean, or hit the catwalk and be killed there, or break both legs. Well, you didn't go there. The statement, you just don't go there, and I didn't go there. I guess I felt that I was going to be picked up, and that the Lord was going to watch over me. Maybe that's what I was thinking. I'm not sure, but it was and I didn't really have any fear when I hopped out of that window. Go out of that porthole. I wasn't afraid. A lot of the Marines were killed. Terrific amount of the Marines. And my friend was in one of the gunnery mounts, in one of the 5-inch guns, and they were completely destroyed, and he was killed. And my best friend, Mosslander, was killed. In fact, all of my close friends were killed in the radio shacks, And I think Mosslander must have been in the one that we were in when we were hit the first time. And that was up near the bow and the elevator shaft. And so they were either killed by the initial explosion or again by the smoke and fire and asphyxiated. But I think the most stirring part of it was that they were blowing taps all day and all night and burying people who had died on the ship. And of course, they put you in a canvas bag and sew the canvas bag up, and they have these steel chutes on the back, put the bags in, cover them with American flags, and blow taps, and all stand at attention, and they go in the water. So this was one of the most, one of the most stirring parts of being on that destroyer, and it made you have a totally different impression of the American flag. It was something very reverent, When you think of how many deaths there have been in the wars and how many young men have been covered by the flag. So it used to make me very angry when they were desecrating the American flags. Well, I think it played a very important part, especially in my faith and what I was trying to do. Well, I always was trying to help people. I mean, I was always inclined in that direction, and one night in our church, we had activities nights, and we had sings, we called them, and you get 30, 40 kids together and you sing the camp songs and everything. And we were in the basement of the church in a big assembly room, and two kids came in off the street, put their bikes up by the front door and came down and they had been drinking. And they weren't real drunk, but they were drunk, and they were about 12 years old. And I thought, who's helping kids like that? And so that changed my attitude toward becoming a church worker into becoming a YMCA worker, because in the YMCA I could help anybody. I wasn't restricted to that denomination or to that group or whatever. They weren't affiliated with any church or anything, and they just came in to see what was going on. Was there a party here, and then they took off on their bicycles. And I thought, there has to be ways to work with kids like that, other than, because they weren't connected with our church or anything, But that's pretty much one of the changing points. And of course, the Franklin was an experience that you never forget. I mean, it's always right there. And it's indelibly marked on your mind, I'd say.